Insurance agents from around the world, welcome to the Insurance Guys podcast. My name is Scott Howell, your fearless host and leader, insurance agency owner and insurance evangelist for I Protect Insurance and Financial Services, based out of Huntsville, Alabama. And before we get started on today's episode, please help me welcome. He is a 6'3" sophomore from Mobile, Alabama, parade first team All-American, Rivals 5-star recruit. He is a fantastic insurance agent and a great American. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome the incomparable Mr. Bradley Flowers. How are you, Bradley?
I have a funny story.
Tell me.
So I was at a kid's birthday party this weekend, 10-year-old birthday party. And I was talking to
I'm sorry.
it was awful. I was talking to this guy I know. You know, not being rude, but, you know, probably a good, 280, 290 pound big dude, my height.
Sure.
Give you an idea. And another friend of ours walks up. It's kind of a lanky guy, and he's got his shoes on, and he's got them tied kind of like yours are. You know how these guys will tie their Jordans and the shoelaces aren't tied in a knot, they're just kind of sticking out?
Kind of turns them into slip-ons.
Yeah. So, I like my shoes tied tight.
Right.
And so I saw that. I was like, how do you get your shoes to stay on when you do? I have a lot of Jordans, have a lot of Air Force Ones. It's like, how do you get your shoes on there to stay on there like that? And he was about to answer, and the other guy, the kind of stocky, hefty guy, he says, Bradley, he said, that's a skinny guy thing. It's the way that skinny guys walk, they can get away with it. He's like, big guys like me and you.
There you go.
And I'm like, what? I'm like, did he just call me fat?
What did the lanky guy say?
He was just kind of speechless, like, did he just say that he thinks they're... For the record, I'm like 180. So
hilarious.
He's a whole nother person, basically.
Unbelievable.
So I immediately went home and started dieting.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to feel about that. So anyway, that was my weekend. So we get home, and Laura's like, how was the party? I was like, that was good. Such and such called me fat. Other than that, she's like, wait, what? So
I was hoping you'd give the lanky guy's response to how he keeps his Jordans on.
So he told me that I was tying them wrong, that what I'm doing is I'm reserving that top hole for just that string.
Right.
And he's like, what you need to do is so you loop it in, okay? And then the hole that it comes in, you go out that same hole. So you have two strings going through one hole.
Gotcha.
And
it tightens
that's what keeps them tight. So I'm going to go try that. I love these shoes too, but I don't know if we can get those on camera. These are my Nike Dunk skate shoes with the turquoise shoelaces. I may try those with these later on.
Strong.
Yeah.
Guys, we got a fantastic guest for you today. I am so excited to have this man on the show. Let me tell you why. Number one, he's in the Marine Corps. Love that. Number two, he's a guy that throughout his life has a resume of success. But from our podcast earlier, and remember, Bradley, I've been obsessed here lately with operational guys. This guy's an operational guy. Okay, he spent most of the 2000s, a lot of the 2000s, in operational type roles, and I think him making the jump from more of the retail side of the business world to insurance has probably served him very well, because he probably understands better than most, certainly more than I did when I started 17, 18 years ago, that how important it is to build that foundation, build that structure before you start running full speed. And I said the word running full speed. Well, I'm just going to give him his bio because I want to give him the introduction he's always deserved. Ladies and gentlemen, he was originally from Houston, Texas, and he currently resides in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's married to the beautiful Carrie, and he's a graduate of Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science degree in political science. Former U.S. Marine Corps captain, served in the Marine Corps for 6 years. Thank you for your service, sir. And he's a current Ironman triathlete. Don't think we're not going to talk about that for a minute. Completing the Lake Placid, New York Ironman in 2024.
Did you get the tattoo?
Spent 20 years in retail after the Marines, running regions for Target, PetSmart, and Dick's Sporting Goods. And in 2023, made the jump to the insurance agency side of business, starting a scratch agency in 2023. He's written a book entitled Marines PT Boot Camp Fitness, available on Amazon. And he has also created his own, very own, CRM system after trying several other systems out. And he's now will be marketing and selling his CRM system to other agents in 2025. He is the owner of Burch Insurance Group, LLC. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor today to introduce to you first-time guest on the IGP, Mr. Darren Burch. How are you, Darren?
Man, thank you. That is a fantastic introduction, man. I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, you're so welcome, man. You've done a lot in your life. You're like me. You're a catch. You've lived 14 lives.
Did you know, Darren, that Scott went to auctioneer school?
What?
Can you do it?
I can tell.
Pretend like we're auctioning off that camera, and Rand is going to buy it real quick. Let's do one of those.
Auctioning off the camera. Let's see. Which camera?
This one.
Okay. $500 bill, give me 500. 500, it'll give me 500. 500. $500 bill, bit buy 500 now. 500 now. 525. 1225 to you there. 525. 1225. 25. Now we're looking for 550. 550. 550. Buy 550. 550. And going once, going twice. We have sold it at $550.
Rand, if you will sell that to me for $550, I'll buy it. How much is that camera worth?
Probably like $6,000.
$6,000. Yeah.
I'll say
you're a crappy auctioneer.
Well, first of all, we would have talked about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about getting put on the spot.
Yeah.
That's like.
I'm joking.
But yeah, we definitely would have talked about that before. And I would have been like, I'm
you're like the real life Forrest Gump.
That's what I tell people. I'm the real life. Anyway, Darren, we got so much to talk about. I want to go back to the start. You're in the Marine Corps. You get out of the Marine Corps. Same here. Throw your boots over the power line. You head to the house. You kind of trip and fall into the retail business a few years later in the early 2000s. How has that experience being a part of some pretty big corporations from a management and operational side, what's that done for you as you took a hard right and got into the insurance industry? I'd love to know that.
Yeah, sure. So right when I got out, I was at MCRD in San Diego. So I was the series commander there. And, I went to work for IBM momentarily for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I think I started to transition into, civilian leadership.
Sure.
Totally different. And I remember one day somebody that was under me, I was a manager, and he told me that, that's not my job. I don't do that. And I just had never heard that before. So I thought, man, this is, what in the world am I doing? So I remember calling my dad that day, and he's a former Air Force veteran from Vietnam. Anyway, so I did it. So we talked it through, but really I think I had to transition how I thought about leadership, military versus civilian. That I got the opportunity. Bob Nardelli, who was the CEO of GE, he transitioned over to Home Depot, and that's how they were starting to recruit JMOs, junior military officers, to come in and run stores for them. And so, I found that ad and I said, that sounds like something that might be, along the lines of what I did in the military, running, larger organizations, lots of people. And so that's how I kind of transitioned into retail. As I went into that program. Initially, it was a 2-year program. But within 6 months, I was running the store. So kind of transitioned quickly, high levels of execution, had to learn how to, what inspired civilians versus, folks in the military. There's a major difference. And I had to start leaning more on inspirational leadership versus kind of just highly directive and
Right.
everybody's. So that was a transition.
I had the hardest time when I got out of the Marine Corps in May of 1999. May of 1999, I got out. I'd been in the fleet, which is, infantry unit.
Yeah.
What I call the real Marine Corps, buddy. I mean, you in the fleet, you doing squares in the ocean, and you're with the infantry platoon, and I told this on the podcast before. I had a hardest time making that transition to civilian, work environment where, like you said earlier, people didn't just you give them a directive. There is no back talk. There is no, well, I can't do that because of this. And another thing I had a really hard time with for a long time was working with women. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I remember I got called to the mat a couple of times. Not that I'd done anything wrong necessarily in terms of sexual harassment or anything like that, but it was more like the way I spoke to them was, how we talked in the Marine Corps.
Oh yeah.
Well, you try doing that with a female in today's society, a lot of males, and everybody's hypersensitive and they don't know how to take that, so they start crying, and then it took me probably 5 years to really dial that back and be able to effectively, I guess, manage people and do it in a way that wasn't so Marine Corps oriented, where it was just, hey, this is what we're going to do. Let's go do it.
It's super direct. And it's like no BS when you're in the military. It's just, hey, this is what we're doing. Let's go. Whereas, you kind of have to come about it at a different angle.
Sure.
The other thing that I found in just leading civilians is just there's not a lot of trust built amongst all of the folks that you work with.
Right.
And that takes a long time to build, whereas it's kind of naturally established.
Sure.
People tell you'll get direct feedback from subordinates, peers, just immediately. Like, hey man, you're terrible at that. And so you get that direct feedback and you're constantly improving. It's a lot faster in the military than you can do that in civilian, because you can't have the direct conversations where you're going to, possibly hurt somebody's feelings.
Yeah, run somebody off, right, yeah. Scott's mean to me. I don't understand. I'll tell you another area that I think I've improved in over the years. Of course, I'm 53 years old now. Dealing with my spouse is another area where I think I've really had to consciously be, as you put it, go at it from a different angle and be a little less Marine Corps.
Like super direct.
Yeah, right. I wanted to, before we get into because I've got some really good questions, I feel like anyway, for you relative to the transition between retail business and then going into the insurance world, the world of insurance here recently. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you got into these triathlons. I mean, being an Ironman triathlete is just about a damn full-time job.
It's close.
Yeah. And, that is an area of fitness, it's a natural blend, although you can't tell it by me because I look like the Grinch. But for people that come out of the Marine Corps, a lot of Marines start doing triathlons. And how did you kind of get into that world and talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I actually started doing triathlons while I was in the Marine Corps. So I had left the fleet from Camp Lejeune.
Sure.
I went over to MCRD in San Diego, and that's kind of like where the capital of all the pro triathletes were out in California.
Right.
And So we kind of got into it. A group of us Marines, the officers, we started riding and running, and you were already training with the recruits. You were running right along with them. So we just kind of got into it. And then we ended up looking for sponsors, and we ended up getting Reebok and CB sunglasses, and we were sponsored essentially.
Yeah.
So we started running races there in California. So that's how I got started. So it was about 20 years ago. So I've been on and off doing triathlons throughout my life. Sometimes life gets in the way and you can't train.
Sure.
And then just recently, so I got back into doing triathlons a couple years ago and knew that I wanted to do a full distance. Now, my wife, Kiri, has done one. She did one about 12 years ago now in New Zealand. So she's already done the full distance. I don't know how to do the full deal. And so anyway, so I started training. So I bought a training program, and what I found, I ran a half Ironman in 2022 in Memphis. Obviously, that was kind of just after COVID hit and everything else, but I did a half and knew I wanted to do a full distance, but the training regimen was nearly double. So I bought a plan and I started going after it. It's probably about 15 hours plus per week of training. And, to be fair, what I really think about it, so was just the discipline of, you knew what you were going to do. You get up at this time. It was just discipline. And I felt good after I got up at 4. I went to the pool. I did the swim. I came back. People are still asleep. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just now getting ready to go off and do my thing for work. I don't know. I just enjoyed that. And that's really, I actually enjoyed the process more than the race. The race is brutal. Yeah. The race is tough.
Hey, but for our listening audience, the Ironman triathlon, okay? Now, this isn't I've done a triathlon before where I was part of a team. So we had a bike rider, then I did the swim because I'm a pretty damn good swimmer. And then we had a friend of mine was like an All-American cross-country runner in college. He did the run. But to do all of this yourself, what are the distances? So
I get winded walking upstairs at my house.
Well, no, that's exactly me too. So the bike is how far?
So it starts with the swim.
Okay.
The swim is 2.4 miles.
Gotcha.
So you do a 2.4 mile swim, hop out, take off your wetsuit, you jump on the bike, and the bike is 112 miles.
Okay.
So that's, if you're a good rider, 5 to 6 hours of riding at least. One in Lake Placid is pretty hilly. It's up the mountains in Adirondacks up there. So and then you get off the bike and you run a marathon. So 26.2
Wow.
at the end. And that's where it really, that's when your training came into play or not.
Separates the men from the boys, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's brutal.
And so the one you did in Lake Placid, how long was the training from the first day you started training until you actually got to the starting line and started the race? How long did you train?
About a year.
Okay.
I was already training for the half. Sure. I just kind of transitioned into about a year out. I transitioned into full distance training and started ramping up my training levels. And the race was just this July in 24. So about 6 months ago.
That makes perfect sense because I had somebody tell me one time, they said, well, if you ever decide to run a marathon, first of all, there's a website you can go to, probably multiple websites, that lists all the marathons all over the country, the New York, the Boston, there's one in Birmingham, Alabama. And he said, first Nashville has a marathon. Pick one that's pretty flat.
Yeah.
So apparently the marathon they do every year in it's called the Magic City Marathon or something like that up in Birmingham, Alabama is real hilly. And so, like you said about Lake Placid, those hills just get to kill you, right?
It's brutal. The bike ride, you did 2 groups of 56 miles. Yep. And the last part of it is kind of pretty steep, probably 4 or 5% grade coming up into the mountains, right, where the transition area is. And then the run had some hills in it too. Not terrible, but it did have some hills, and you felt every single one of them.
Yeah.
That's where, you're training, if you're well trained, if you can actually run the entire run.
Yeah, right. So the guy I was talking to about doing a marathon, he said, well, the training regiment, this is just a marathon. This is a triathlon, is about 6 months. You need to give yourself about a 6-month runway to go through the whole process, and then obviously it ends with the big crescendo of actually doing the marathon, and you slowly work up to being that last week being ready to actually run a marathon. So kudos to you for doing that, man. That is amazing. Romantically, I would love to do that. I think if I did a marathon or especially an Ironman, I'd probably be in the hospital for 3 weeks after that. Like if I didn't die, I really did.
Some people out there, I mean, they just take all day to do it. There are cutoffs though. Like if you don't make a certain timeline on the swim, the bike, and the run, it kind of cuts you off because they know you're not going to make it. But on my training, I'm telling people, some friends, hey, I'm going to ride to Wisconsin and back. I'm over here in Minneapolis. So I'd ride out to Wisconsin, all the way to Wisconsin and back for part of my training. They thought it was nuts.
So last question, then we'll move on to insurance. After the Lake Placid Ironman in July of 24, which is probably pretty warm in Lake Placid in July.
It's perfect weather.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, how long did it take you from a recovery? Like, were you able to walk the next day?
I could barely walk the next day, but I had to move around. So I did walk around in the town of Placid. It took probably about 2 weeks to get back to where I could actually probably do some decent running.
Sure.
Normal again. Yeah, it took a while.
That is crazy. That's awesome. So let's move back into insurance for a minute. We got a lot to talk about there. What has been the biggest eye opener for you personally, moving from more of that retail types of business that you've been a part of from a management and operations, and then you jump over here to the insurance agency world that Bradley and I have been in for a long time? What's been the biggest eye opener for you personally that you've either, I guess, just said, wow, I wasn't expecting that?
Yeah. I spent probably the last 15 years at a pretty high level. I'd have 1,000 to 2,000 people working for me as kind of a director.
Sure.
Retail. And when you go from that to you're wearing all the hats, you're on your own.
Yep.
There are just some things that you can't predict that'll happen. Things that I want to happen faster can't happen faster because, I've got to go through certain phases of open up a business and getting carrier appointments. So as fast and as hard as I wanted to go, it didn't matter if I worked 100 hours a week or not, there was a process I had to go through. So, be patient, but the biggest eye opener was like wearing all the hats. And like, I didn't have an admin and all that stuff to help me. And so that's where I started to realize that I needed to get automated quickly. And so I used my operational skill to try to figure out how do I get this stuff automated, it takes up off my plate so I can grow and, and go from there. So yeah, that was the biggest surprise.
So is that what led you to the CRM?
It is 100%. I needed a way to track all these leads, so I would either buy leads or get leads. I'm part of networking groups. And so, if you're calling leads, how do you track which one's next? And how do you need to have a system. And I had tried a couple of them to, remain unnamed, but I just didn't really find them have enough of the features that I really needed. And so
no, let's name them. Who did you try?
Agency Zone. I think I tried MVP. I tried those two. I looked at HubSpot. That was just ungodly expensive for me, just trying to run a small business. And looked at a couple others that I didn't actually test, but I looked at the features. And so I ended up finding this, and I just built my own. I thought, man, I need a lot more in there. So I ended up building my own.
Now, I think every agent who's listening to this that is any kind of entrepreneurial or a problem solver has at one point, it may not be a CRM, but it may be some system they have thought about man, I should just build my own version of this, right? And a lot of times that's easier said than done, or all of the time that's easier said than done. How long did it take you? What was that process like? What issues did you run into? And ultimately, what are some of the features that you built for yourself that some of the other CRMs may not have? And I can attest, we built our own rater last year. And I remember I was speaking with a buddy who had built a rater company and sold it. And he was like, man, you guys thought of so much stuff that we didn't sell because that we didn't build because you're in it every day.
Yeah. So, how long did it take me? First of all, it took me probably two and a half months or so.
Okay.
And, this is meanwhile, I'm also trying to, sell commercial insurance policies and, call on leads and trying to do that. I felt like that was kind of like the day job. This became like the night job. In the morning was training for triathlons, and the day job was insurance selling. In the evening, I would get into YouTube and everywhere else and trying to figure out how do I build this technology out. And I figured it all out and put it together. I think that some of the features that I needed a pipeline. So I knew I needed that. I needed a way to track all of my clients. And, I just continued to customize that. Email campaigns, text message campaigns, that's now all built in there. So now it's kind of automated for me. One of the features that I really liked about the one that I built is I built a missed call text back feature in there. So when someone called my agency and I happened to be on the phone with somebody else, another client, this is back when I was, by myself, it basically sends them a text message and a link to my calendar so they could just book on my calendar and it would just fill up my calendar. I mean, the number of appointments I got from that alone was phenomenal because I was missing calls.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that's just a few. Then it also has like a social media feature in there where you can post to all of your social media, do all your marketing. You can build your forms in there where you can actually send a form to a client or connect it to my website. Now I have my website hosted through the CRM, through WordPress, and it basically connects everything together. So Facebook ads dumps right into your CRM, and then I have Zapiers that send it over to other software companies like WonderWrite and that kind of thing if I need to write, business. So those are, that's just a few of the things that I built into it to make it kind of personalized. And I didn't feel like there was anything out there that really kind of fit what I'm looking for. Like a few months ago, just built an automation to, hey, let's just, instead of using Constant Contact or some other software, I just built in there an automated system that says happy birthday to everybody on their birthday, and it sends them a nice card and it has a link to book an appointment with me. Same thing for holidays. So it kind of gets additional touch points without me having to do anything. Because I think that's one of the complaints I hear when I pick up new clients. I can't get hold of my agent or,
Right.
I never hear from them. So those are just a few things that I think make it unique in itself.
How many things a day do you try to get accomplished? Do you have like a five? So I've always heard that you create like a list, an action list or a to-do list, whatever you want to call it, of 5 things a day to get accomplished, right? Now, for big tasks, for instance, you decide to build a CRM system. Well, you can't do that in one day. It's never going to happen. So you time block an hour, maybe 2 hours a day as one of those 5 things that you try to get accomplished. Do you do something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Holy cow. So now I picked up that from just being a district manager in retail. I use, and I'll just say it out there, it's the Full Focus Planner. It's actually, you write it down, and I can open up my planner. I've got it sitting next to me here, but you put your goals in there, and one of them became, hey, I need to build my own CRM. Yeah. And so how do you do that? Then you just map out, I need to carve out 2 hours a week or 3 or at night. You just build it into your planner. I actually try to do 3 major things per day for that week. that align with my quarterly and yearly goals that I set. So I try to connect it all together. But if I don't, I have to have a super dialed in calendar. If I don't, I get way off track and I don't feel like I move the needle.
Right.
So that's, again, back to my operational side. I have to have it dialed in because I don't want to waste the time, because in the running a small business, like you guys know, you have to create the task, you have to create the goal, you have to, like, whereas when you're with a big company, they're creating the goals for you and you try to aim for that. Here, you're creating that stuff. And so if I'm not aligned and dialed in on the calendar, but I can get off track.
So this will probably be my last question for you. And it's not really a question. It's more of a opportunity for you to ask questions, because you got to remember, Bradley and I have been doing this a long time. What questions or question or thing that you're maybe have, because you've only been doing this now a couple of years, you've been in the insurance space, right? Is there anything you'd like to ask us that we might have a little bit of a more experienced viewpoint on relative to insurance? I mean, the whole purpose behind this podcast is to help insurance agents any way we can. So I'm going to ask you, do you have any questions or a question for Bradley and I that maybe we could help you with?
Absolutely, I do. So a couple things. One, hiring producers, and maybe, what's the best pay plans you've found? As I do the math on some of that, it doesn't tend to work out and pay for itself, right? So you have to either make it just as an investment. You also have to try to recruit talent that's good enough to put into your agency and not just have them click out. So that would be number one. And then number two, I'm trying to move from, I'd say, small market. And I started with really small market commercial to like now small market, small used car dealerships, stuff like that. I'm trying to march into a little bit of middle market, kind of that area, and struggling to figure out, what's the best marketing strategy to go into that and get there.
Bradley, you want to go? Bradley, I think Bradley has got some good thoughts on producer pay and how to hire great producers. I think you're probably a little more better. I guess better would be the term to answer that question.
So the way we do our producers, when we think about people at other agencies, my avatar for producers that are at other agencies are either people who are at small agencies who may not have our resources or our size,
or just not happy,
or people who are at large agencies but have not been there very long. And same for the smaller agencies too. If they've been there for a long period of time, it's going to be hard to convince them to move over because they have a book and residuals and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, right? Like there's a producer here locally that wants to come to work for us, hates the agency that he's at, but can't come because it's like, I'd have to pay him $150,000 a year. It's not going to work.
Right.
So that's sort of the target avatar. You want someone that's got a little bit of experience, but not too much. You know what I mean? The hardest part about independent insurance is the training. It's just much easier to hire somebody with experience. The other thing is, I think a lot of people throw the job title producer out too loosely. I'm hesitant to make people a producer unless they have true experience producing. Typically what we are doing now is when we hire you, unless you are a true blue producer at another agency, we are starting you either in inside sales, so you're handling all the inbound leads that come in, as an account manager, CSR, or as an outbound dialer for the producers. and then that's your path once you prove yourself to us. Okay, but let's put that to the side. Let's pretend that you are somebody's a true producer. So the way I do my compensation, and you're right, it's really tough to give a producer a salary and have them be profitable, right? But it's really hard to convince them to come over without some sort of guaranteed pay. So what we do is you remember the old school sales draws?
Yeah.
And for those of you listening, the way that the old school sales draws would work, let's say for round numbers, it's $3,000 a month, right? We pay more than that, but just for round number, let's say it's $3,000 a month. Okay. The first $3,000 in revenue that producer that month generates, the agency keeps. And then every dollar above that they get minus their split. Okay. If they have a month that they don't do $3,000 in revenue, let's say they do 2, they build up a debt to the company. Okay. And so the next month they have to do 4. Okay. Let's say they only do 2 the next month after that, they got to do 6. That's how it's a rolling debt. And then at the end of usually a year, by the way, this is how most of the big agencies pay their producers. At the end of a year, if they haven't met their draw, they fire them, if not sooner. And in a lot of cases, that actually converts to actual debt that they owe that company. I interviewed with AIG Life Insurance back in 2011, and that's how that was actually exactly how their compensation worked. It was $3,000 a month. If you didn't sell that much, you owed that back to them as a loan.
Nope.
So what we do is we do the first part of that without the second part. So I give every producer a draw somewhere around $40K, somewhere in that range, and they can structure it however they want to. I've got one person that wanted $5,000 a month for the first 3 months, and then whatever was left over, we divided that by 9. And essentially, again, for round numbers, let's say $3,000 a month. The first $3,000 in revenue is withheld by the agency, so they paid for themselves. Okay, they get their split above that. Okay, now if they get to a year and they hadn't quite met it, I don't fire them. Like I'll even give them. I've had a couple people I've given a little longer. Like I'll give you 6 months more. You're doing okay. Here's why: because if I hire a producer and I give them a $3,000 a month salary and they do $2,000 in revenue, okay, that costs me $3,000 plus the split on the revenue, right? But if I do the draw, if I hire them $3,000, if they get $3,000 and they did $2,000 in revenue, it only costs me $1,000.
Right.
So so essentially the way to look at it is every month we take their draw and the revenue that they generated, whichever one is higher is the one they get. Another way to look at it is it's essentially commission only. I'm just guaranteeing them, I'm taking the risk that they're going to be a good performer and it's on me to get them there. I'm taking the risk. So it's essentially commission only, just with a guarantee that they're going to make $40,000.
Can I ask a question?
And what it allows you to do is you can spin up producers a lot faster, because it's not a direct 40, because if you hire somebody that doesn't sell anything and you keep them a year, not that you would, but let's say you did, it's a direct $40,000 hit to the bottom line. Right. Yeah. And their goal is to validate that, i.e. sell $40,000 in revenue or more. At that point, they go to commission only. They get renewals on the book they wrote. So you can get people rolling a lot faster. What was your question?
So 2-part question. Number one, when they start, and let's say their goal is $3,000 a month. That's their draw. They're going to make $3,000 a month. And let's say they knock the bottom out of it the first month and they do $5,000 in revenue to the agency. So $3,000 of that,
the agency keeps.
But they're getting a draw of $3,000. $3,000 goes to them, right? That $2,000 over, is that? What's the commission split on that new business?
Let's say they get a 50% split, so that month they would make $4,000.
Okay, so the agency would get some of that.
Yeah. Now, if you want to get real aggressive with it, what you can do is you can say this. You can do the opposite, where let's say you did 5,000 in revenue and your draw is 3,000, you can say 50% of 5,000, 2,500, you didn't meet your draw. If you want to get real, but that's not.
Wait, say that again.
So like 5,000, 3,000, you can, instead of it being the first 3,000, it can be the first 3,000 after the split.
Ugh.
And then, yeah, it's not advantageous to the producer, but it's aggressive.
So in that case, they wouldn't be making 100% of the first 3,000. They'd just be. And so the second part of that question was, let's say they stay with you,
and we don't do that, by the way. We do the first one,
right? But I'm saying after the first year, okay, when the producer starts getting renewals, and let's say they're still with you and they're on that $3,000 draw situation, then how do the renewals play into that? Or do you take them off the 3,000 and put them on straight commission?
The renewals play into it. If they still are getting the draw and they're getting some renewals, because if they write like auto, there'll be some renewals the first year.
Yeah.
We just take the total revenue generated in the AMS from them.
So
that
above
month.
the 3,000 with renewals, what percentage would you pay them?
Typically, the first year we do 50% new, 30 renewal.
Sounds about right.
And then once they validate, we'll bump it up to 55, 35. I'm real conservative with my splits.
And I just walked you into what I was going to, the only part of this I was going to add to what I was going to tell Darren is one thing you have to be very careful of, Darren, is I love what Bradley's doing there. I think that's probably the right way to do it because it separates the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
Wish I had done that and may start doing that. But my only comment to that would be I see a lot of newer agencies, your size, your age, that find this like person like Rand that they think is just this person's going to knock the bottom out of it. And they'll pay them some ridiculous split like 80 or 90% new business, 60 or 70% renewal, and you can't do that because
can't make any money.
The agency's not going to make you money.
But what a lot of people don't realize is, I mean, the average independent agency's profit margins are 25%.
Right.
Okay. That's not, to producers listening, that's not 25% of the revenue generated. That's 25% after the split.
Right.
So if your producer's getting 60-40, your profit on that is 10.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right. So like if you're paying somebody 75% new and they're W-2, after you factor in technology costs, cost of service, all that stuff, you're actually losing money.
Yeah.
And so the longer we're in business, the more conservative I am with my splits, because the fact of the matter is the big agencies, they're all in the 10 to 30% range for new business.
Yeah, the industry average, correct me if I'm wrong, is usually 40-30.
Yeah, I don't know.
40% new, 30% renewal.
To answer the second question,
I forgot the second question.
Middle
What's
market,
the second question?
getting into middle market.
Oh,
I would target niches, Darren, that you can pull lists on.
Yep.
Niches like trucking, contractors,
yeah,
stuff that there's some sort of like licensure board or some sort of organization that the government is involved where you can go buy a list of contact info. That's been one of the best things that we've done for our middle market stuff. We just had, and this isn't necessarily middle market. While we've been on this podcast, one of my producers wrote a pretty large account off an email drip campaign.
Yeah.
I saw the lead source, and it's essentially we buy a list and we drop them in an email drip campaign that emails them right before renewal. We're also calling them and stuff like that too, but that anything you can pull a list on. One of our niches are real estate investors, and that's really that's really bad niche because you can't figure out who they are a lot of times. That's kind of the biggest thing I would say with that sort of stuff is just stuff that you can quantify.
Yep.
And you can say like, I know if somebody has 10 trucks, we're going to be looking at, somewhere in the 150 to 350,000 range premium for trucking, right? You can not only can you get the data, but you can quantify who your target avatar is. Like I'll never forget, I had a buddy who worked on, and this is one of those guys that would only work on like one account a month. And he worked on this account. It was a new business in an interesting sector in the nuclear sector. and the title of the business literally had the word nuclear in it, the name of the business. And I talked to him like 4 times over a month. He's working on this account, and it was like one of those deals that like there wasn't a class code that existed. And he worked on it, Bass Underwriters, and he gets his terms back, and it's $450 minimum premium.
What?
Because what they were doing actually was not dangerous at all.
Yeah.
And he's like, crap, I just wasted a month and a half working on this, and I'm going to make $40. And he ended up calling the owner and charged him an agency fee because he was like, bro, I'm making like minimum wage, less than minimum wage, you know. So you don't want that to happen. You don't want to put all this effort into this niche, and then you call them and they're a contractor that does $300K in revenue and they're paying $5,000 in insurance. You'd be better off writing a personal lines policy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I started doing some used car dealerships. I kind of just, I don't know if I just fell into that, but I started getting phone calls because particularly in Minnesota, they've got to be admitted carriers, and I have the carriers. And so started doing some marketing, and, you know, these smaller used car dealers, I mean, they're perfect.
Well,
Bonds for them, stuff like that.
More power to you, man. But there is no group of people that I would like to deal with less than used car dealers.
It can be a squirrely bunch sometimes. You're right.
But it's kind of one of these things like
Somebody's got to write it.
they're probably the type that you can give it back to them and they won't get offended.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, the conversation you have with those guys is different than you would for an accountant or, you know, the bubble tea retail shop that I just closed. So yeah, it's different. You can kind of, and I've had a couple come into my office, you know, kind of grok and just walk in here. Well, I need my bond, and you're gonna, so, you know.
How many of them try to haggle with you and pay cash for their insurance?
Yeah. I had a guy come in and with a stack and paying for his entire policy. It was like $6,000. He just said, "Here you go."
Shoot. Well, Darren, thank you so much. I'm going to shut this thing down. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We appreciate you very much. Bradley, great advice today, by the way. Great advice. You've been on a tear this past week.
Thank you.
Of podcast. Guys, as I end every episode, rewards come from action, not discussion. I'm going to tell you what my friend Mike Stromso told me one time. You want to make a little bit of money in the insurance business, sell personal lines. You want to make a pretty good bit of money in the insurance business, sell commercial, mid-market. You want to make Oprah Winfrey money in the insurance business and have your own helicopter and your own island and fly around all over the world and 6 houses and all that. Figure out a way to create a program that nobody else has access to but you, and you will end up making Oprah Winfrey money. And that, I don't know that I'll ever get there because that's tough to do. But if you can crack the code, you can make a lot of money in the insurance space. Go make money for your wife, for your husband, for your kids' college fund, for your parents and in-laws that are struggling out there like mine. Go make money for them. Write good business for the agencies that you represent, and write good business for the carriers that you represent. Bradley Flowers, I love you.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Darren. Appreciate you, brother.
Yes. Appreciate it. See you.
All right. Yeah. Guys, you're listening to the Insurance Guys podcast. We love each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being a part of our family. And we'll see you back here real soon. Take care.